Welcome to this discussion, which is about a book called Unaging, The Four Factors That Impact How You Age, with Dr. Robert Friedland. Dr. Friedland is professor and chair of neurology in Louisville, Kentucky, and a very eminent Alzheimer's disease researcher and neurologist and teacher, but he's also a great thinker. And he proposed some very interesting concepts regarding how we age, which is going to be the subject of today's conversation. Thank you for agreeing to do this, Rob.
Thank you very much, Krish.
Let me start by asking you, in what ways does an awareness of the relative nature of one's position in life influence how we approach aging?
That's actually a very profoundly spiritual question. So depending on what you think about the nature of your existence, it will influence what you do and how you prepare for aging. And I had a prolonged discussion yesterday at a scientific meeting at dinner. One member of the group was smoking. And I tried to convince her, of course, of all the things she knows about the dangers of smoking and how it was irrational to say, I'm not afraid of dying. So I pointed out to her, since she said she was Christian, in the Bible, we are all made in the image of God. And this is a Jewish, Christian, and Muslim teaching also. And what the Hindu sages said about this, I don't know, but I'm sure they said something similar, which is because we're made in the image of God, we can't damage ourselves. That's not permitted. And it's a good reason, a good explanation for why you shouldn't, one of so many reasons why you shouldn't smoke. And similarly, if you have a spiritual view on your life and upon where you came from and where you're going, not that I have any answers about this, but if you have these questions, you may perhaps understand that it's a blessed opportunity that we all have to be alive today and prepare for tomorrow. And in order to do that, we need to be careful about what we do and what risks we entertain. What are the benefit and risks of all our activities? And if we, not only, of course, if we smoke, but do we ride a motorcycle without a helmet? Do we eat badly? Do we spend every evening watching television? And do we pay no attention to having exercise and being physically, mentally, and socially active? So I find that it is a spiritual issue which many people are not willing to deal with. They consider the moment right now, the idea that they might live to be, a 30-year-old, the idea that they might live for 40 more years and be 70, how they're going to be in 70, they don't want to consider it. But a more informed or even enlightened position is to say, well, nobody knows how long we're going to live. So since it's certainly possible, hopeful perhaps, that a 30-year-old will be here and 40 years later when they're 70, hopefully they're considering the wisdom of taking care of themselves now and how they will be rewarded later.
The person who was smoking rather ill-advisedly, do you also not think this is a sort of related question? Do you also not think that it's partly because we think of the end of life as something that's going to happen suddenly, whereas aging as part of the end of life can be a fairly prolonged process for many? And that's not a very pleasant way to go. And we don't really consider that when people do risk-taking behaviors. So
that's exactly right. I know of a 80-year-old scientist he's very bright. He's made some great discoveries, but he does not exercise. He eats meat all the time, and he drinks vodka regularly. And he tells me, if I talk about this, he said, I'm not afraid of dying. I tried to explain that we don't have a choice. You could go like that, or you could have a stroke and for 20 years be aphasic and unable to move out of a wheelchair. So he would laugh. The simplest way to consider it is my patient, which I describe in the book, who drove a motorcycle without a helmet. And when I asked him why he did that, he said, when you're going to go, you're going to go. And I try to express how that's not reasonable, because we do watch out for things every day. When we cross the street, we wait for traffic to pass. We don't cross the street saying, well, when you're going to go, you're going to go. I might as well go now. So that applies to all of these things. Because true that when you're going to go, you're going to go, because there are things we can all do.
The mindset is so important, isn't it? And some proactive behaviors towards aging are quite crucial for most of us to age successfully.
That's right. And the best context for this is evolution, because we're not made, so to speak, to have such a long life. Evolution is concerned about babies and raising your babies and the babies surviving so they can have babies. After that, there's no additional adaptive value of our survival. So that each moment after 40 is a blessing, which is not, we're not prepared for to be 50, 60, and 70, because it doesn't help the survival of our genes, which is what counts in evolution.
So once we pass them on, the purpose has already been served from an evolutionary perspective.
Yes, and once they grow up, and that's it. This isn't right or wrong. This is just the way it is.
That's a very interesting thought. You titled your book very interestingly. You call it Unaging. And you talk about the 4 factors that impact on how you age. Please tell us what got you here? What led you to this thought process?
I've been seeing patients with memory disorders for 45 years. And they often have memory problems and behavior difficulties and language problems, motor problems. And they may have Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and or they may not, or they may just be older, healthy people. So I decided to put all the things I have to say in a book, because I only have an hour with the patients. And they may come back, of course, and I may have another hour, but during that hour, I must discuss the drugs and the family history and their examination, and various things about lifestyle factors and their medical history and so on. So it's not a lot of time. There are a lot of things I'd like to say I don't have time to say. So my thought experiment for this book was, what if I had an unlimited amount of time and I could say anything I wanted, if not only to say, eat vegetables? Why? And why is it good to have a diversity of vegetables? And what is it about exercise? Why, according to evolution? So maybe I'm basically having a conversation with my patients in this book that would take 30 or 40 hours if I were just to do it, but which is not possible to do that with my patients. And the word unaging was chosen by the editors at Cambridge University Press. So I had no influence on that word. And I didn't like it in the beginning, but they wanted to have something in one word that would summarize it. So I've adapted to use it, but of course it was not my choice.
It's a very striking title.
So I wanted to call it The Declaration of Interdependence. because we are all interdependents, the brain and the liver and it's all interdependence, but it's also interdependence on us and our society and our friends, our family, our activities, our diet is related to, and all of this is related to poverty, which is maybe another matter, but all the bad things that lead to more disease are more common in poor people. And that does not get much attention.
In fact, interestingly, an Indian researcher, Vikram Patel, has shown that the most important predictor of depression is poverty in India. That was a publication a few years ago. So you're so right.
I think, right.
You've talked about 4 reserves: cognitive reserve, physical reserve, psychological reserve, and social reserve. Do you rank any one of these as being most important? And why?
That's a great question. First, I must point out that they're all related to each other. My favorite example is a Japanese man we know in Kyoto. He's 90 years old. And we saw him on his knees on the ground planting rapeseed oil, maybe it's called. And it makes beautiful yellow flowers. And he was planting it under the cherry blossoms along the canal in Kyoto. And the cherry blossoms are quite beautiful in the spring. And he was planting these yellow flowers because when the yellow flowers bloomed at the same time as the cherry blossoms, it's really incredibly beautiful. And he was doing this, and this activity had a cognitive component because he had to do it at the right time and plant the certain depth and how far away from each other. And it had a social component because his neighbors were helping him. It had a physical component because this is physical work, being 90 years old on your knees planting. It had a psychological component because he could look on in pride when we would come by. It would take your breath away how beautiful the yellow and the pink were together. And he would stand there and watch and have the knowing that what he did was meaningful to other people. So all 4 things were encountered in one activity. And that's generally true about all the 4 reserves. So I remember an older woman was taking classes in cello, and she was in a music camp, and she was running from one class to the other with her cello. And I thought I didn't really appreciate how music had a physical component, but also and a social component because she's there with other people, and a psychological component. I took her picture. I asked, can I take your picture? And she said, yes. And then, can I share it with my children? Send me the picture. I want to show my grandchildren that I'm learning to play the cello. So it has a psychological component, social, physical, and cognitive. So if I had to pick one, I would say physical activity is good for the brain, and it's also good for the heart. And the largest cause of death in the world is coronary artery disease. And exercise is good for that. So that exercise is good for the brain. And it is very fortunate that all the things I recommend in the book are good for the heart as well as good for the brain. There isn't anything I can think of that's good for the brain that's bad for the heart, or that's good for the heart that's not bad for the brain, because the brain is dependent upon the heart. So that it's all really quite magnificently evidence for the wisdom of the Buddha, who said everything is related to everything else.
Your theory of interdependence, or
Right.
your declaration of interdependence. You're living in a fast-changing world, and if technology, for example, is becoming such an important part of human existence, and rapidly so. Do you think these reserves will change? The importance of these reserves will change in any way in these circumstances?
That's a difficult question. I think they will get more important, and they will be challenged by technology. And now, if I had to write a report about a book when I was in school, I had to read the book. There was no other choice. now, if I was in school, I would just look it up in Wikipedia, and it would tell me exactly what the book is about. And how could a teacher possibly tell the difference between if you read the book or you read about the book? So that it's easier to be have a lifestyle dependent upon the news, which is constantly available and always gripping. We listen to some channel, it says every single day it's a breaking news, breaking news, breaking news. Well, I don't know if a bus crashes in Colombia, South America, that's a tragedy. I'm sorry, but I don't call it breaking news, not in the United States, because those things happen. Unfortunately, they happen. So that, and I'm afraid with increased technology now, if you're on the subway, and how can you talk to other people? Everybody is on their cell phone. I'm sure, and of course, well, I'm sure 100 years ago on the train, people would be talking to each other, because what else would they do? There's more and more packaged food, ultra-processed food, and opportunities for fast food, and new foods that are probably not good for you to eat. Like the potato chips that come in a tube, they're not really made out of potatoes. And I see people on the train, in the restaurant, doing something on their cell phone, and they're playing solitaire, which is really, as far as I know, does not involve learning, does not have a cognitive it's like a robotic thing with numbers. And why would you waste your time doing that? When similarly, I've seen in restaurants a table of 4 with a mother, father, and 2 small children, and all 4 of them are on their cell phone, or the children are on some game. And I feel like I want to go as a doctor. I want to go, wait, this is child abuse. Do you know that your kids are going to learn how to talk by talking to you? So the whole point of being here in a restaurant is talk to your children. Let your children learn how to express themselves. Show them that what they have to say is important. I don't do that, but that.
So I guess one of the casualties of technology is socialization and human interaction changing very dramatically.
There are other things which are more beneficial. Like here I am talking to you in 5,000 miles away, and this really quite. And I have a feeling like it's as if we were here together. So that it's quite astounding.
Yes.
We had the other day, I'm meeting with a French scientist who works in Luxembourg, and on the Zoom call was a Mexican scientist who works in Okinawa, and me, and we were discussing common research together, all on the same screen. It's quite wonderful.
When it comes to being assessed, or usually we start thinking about our reserves probably in midlife, 40s and 50s is when people become aware of needing to know what their reserves are like. But is there an optimal point in time to assess oneself for these reserves? The cognitive reserve, the physical reserve, the psychological reserve, the social reserve.
Yes, thank you for that question. The discussion or consideration of these factors should begin in childhood. So I wrote a paper with Carol Brain, who's an epidemiologist from Cambridge. What should the pediatrician know about Alzheimer's disease? And my idea is all the risk and protective factors involve what you do over the course of your life from birth to death. And what you do at different times are important, all of it at different times. But the most important time is childhood, when lifestyle patterns are developed. So if you learn as a child that the best thing to do is to watch television all day in the morning, have it on all the time, and that you're just fixed and grafted into the daytime television and evening in the news and all of this, and that's how you live your life. That's not good. But that would be a habit obtained in childhood. If you learn to play American football as a boy growing up in America, that's something that not only will damage your brain, but it's not something you can do after high school. A small percentage of high school players will actually play in college, and a very small percentage of the college players will play in the National Football League. So it's not like you're learning something which will be of any value after you get to be 20, 25 years old. Or very few people can play basketball after the age of 30 because it's really it's a wonderful game, but it's hard on your body, especially on your ankles. And it's a good thing to do, but it's not something you're going to be able to do later, which is why either tennis or golf or just going to the gym and being physically active is that, but that kind of thing is best to begin early. Similarly, if you learn as a child that you can't eat eggs without sausage, or like you haven't eaten dinner if you didn't have meat. That's it. We've had that discussion in my family. But that's something that begins early. But however, understand, even if you smoke tobacco for years and stop, you lower your risk by stopping. Even if you've been smoking for 40 years, it's still better for you to stop rather than continue. And I say that physical exercise is something that almost everyone can do. Even if you're in a wheelchair, you can do things with your arms. And I had surgery on my ankle, and I just happened to be going to the Louvre in Paris. And my wife drove me around in a wheelchair because I couldn't, the crutches were too painful. And I had a wonderful time. So it was very, of course, cognitively stimulating to see all these beautiful paintings. And even though I couldn't walk, I did it. Of course, my wife would have another explanation of what that experience was like. But it's not, you can't say that, well, I am 70 years old now and my hip hurts, I can't do any exercise. You could walk in water. It's called aquatic therapy, and the pool is warm, so you couldn't walk in water, which is the normal temperature of a swimming pool, but they make it extra warm so you're comfortable. And by walking in water, because the buoyancy might relieve the pain for the hip, and that's physical activity you could do.
So at any stage, it's important that one stays engaged, one stays active, one stays engaged both cognitively and socially, and of course, psychologically. One of the questions I have is there something you would advise people to incorporate into their daily routines? To give you an example, what should young people, young working professionals try to incorporate into their daily routines? And as opposed to someone in middle life, as opposed to someone who's retiring. Could you please elaborate on that?
Right. I think, yes, it's necessary to consider exercise as being critical for your health and survival. If you just say, well, I like to go to the gym, but I won't go today because I have a lot of work, or I won't go tomorrow because I'm going out to dinner, and I won't go the next day because I'm not feeling well, and the next day, before you know it, maybe you never go. So rather than consider it something that you're going to do when you have a moment, you just decide you have to do it 3 times a week, and you're going to do it no matter what. Even if I've often found that I feel too tired, I really don't want to go, but if I force myself, I'll feel good at the end. And the beauty of tennis is you have to go. If you have an appointment to play, you have your partner, so you can't decide, I'm really tired, I'm not going to go today. You just have to go, which is good. Young people should make good choices about what they eat. I'm concerned and also appreciate the value of sleep, because it's now apparent that sleep is important for health, And the latest evidence said that everybody needs 8 hours. That people who say, "Oh, I only need 6 hours," they're probably wrong. And that actually the brain is being cleansed when you're sleeping. It's a complicated process, but toxins are being removed from the brain. And if you don't sleep well, you have a higher risk of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And that's a habit you need to get into. Also, we might discuss this later, but I think meditation is valuable, especially if it's a practice that you do on a regular basis. If you just meditate when you have nothing else to do, so, well, why don't I meditate now because I have nothing, then you won't do it very often. If you can incorporate it into a daily schedule, that can be important. And then perhaps for cognitive activities, it can be helpful if you make time for things in a more rigid manner. If you want to read a book, you have a favorite book, you really want to read it, rather than just read it when you have nothing else to do, you could say, okay, I'm going to make a note in my diary that on Wednesday at 3 o'clock, I'm going to read, or whatever time it might be. So you're more likely to actually do it rather than wait until the moment that you have nothing to do.
Planning and incorporating routines concerning these activities into our weekly life is probably important. One of the things that most people want to know is, how do you build your cognitive reserve? I mean, it's something that starts concerning people in middle life, and especially when they retire or they're close to retirement. So how does one build cognitive reserve? How does one maintain cognitive reserve so that you don't lose your memory when you get old?
It's important to remember that the brain is an organ for learning. Like a muscle is an organ for contraction, and the kidneys are filtering the blood. The brain actually does more than just learning. It's also regulating body temperature and so many other things. But learning is certainly one of the most important things the brain does. And if you don't use your capacity for learning, it will get, if your hobby is knitting and all you do is knit socks, just socks, all the same color, socks and socks, I guess that doesn't involve a lot of learning. If your hobby is knitting and you're making different things, so you have to study the different geometrical relationships, about how, where the legs go and how long that involves some learning. If you collect beer cans, even that can involve learning. I don't know what kind of beer was popular in the 40s in Philadelphia, or this kind of thing could be a subject for beer can enthusiasts. I know people who collected beer cans, and that's fine if it involves learning. And the brain is a plastic organ, meaning it's modifiable. So that if you do decide to learn the cello, here is the cello again, the relationship between these two fingers on the fingerboard is very important. When you hold a beer can, it doesn't matter where these two fingers are. So that when you learn the cello, you're actually producing new neurons. The brain is growing new neurons, and it's growing more connections for those neurons. So the connection between the motor function for these fingers and hearing, of course, gets enhanced because you have to put the finger in the right place so you have the right note. And that's good, so that the brain is aging in response to what you do. Otherwise, the brain is, when you get older, the neurons are being lost. You can't stop that, but you can help to keep them alive by keeping them active.
And therefore, cognitive reserve is not just performing cognitive activities, but a diversity of activities, and preferably some new things, so that you're sort of ensuring that your neuroplasticity is engendered. Would that be a fair comment to make?
Yes, exactly. That's very good. yes, it's good to do more than one thing. So that a key component is diversity. So that you want to have diversity of activities, diversity of diet, diversity of exercise, diversity of social interactions.
You mentioned movement quite a bit, why exercise is important. There's a lot about walking and the number of steps that you take as being an important part of maintaining your reserve. Do you have a view on this? Is there a specific number of steps? Is walking the best exercise?
I think walking is a very good exercise. And there are various studies about how long or how fast, and I'm not sure which advice is best, but it is good to walk, and certainly it's good to have daily activities or plan for activities, so that if you can go up the stairs rather than take the elevator, you're getting more exercise. And perhaps at least an hour and a half or 2 hours of exercise a week would be good, but more exercise would be better. It's advisable to raise your heart rate, but if you can't do that, it's okay, even walking without increasing your heart rate. And certainly running is not necessary. And many people think they can't exercise because they can't run, which is a mistake.
I've heard various numbers thrown at me: 8,000 steps, 10,000 steps, 15,000 steps. The usual thing is about 5 days a week. But do you think any of that makes sense? Is there a kind of optimal number of steps that a person should take?
I don't know. It would depend on your cardiac capacity, and I don't know which number to believe. Also, it's hard that we really can't do research on some of these things, because what's important is the great period of life from birth to death. It's not only like when you're 72 years old, how much should you exercise?
We were talking about this a little earlier, before this conversation started, about how older people tend to get excluded, even from something like a family meal. And of course, sometimes you can be, as an older person, physically present, but not involved because of hearing impairment or visual impairment or something quite natural like that as part of aging. And of course, people in your peer group, as you get older, people start to disappear. The ones you love, the ones you're close to. So how does one maintain social reserve as one ages? What can one do? And how important is it?
Social factors are related to physical activity. And in addition, it's being socially inactive is a risk factor for depression. And one important factor is that when you're working, often people have a sense of meaning in life through their work, or of course, sense of meaning in life through their relationships with their spouse and their children. Then when we get older and we lose our job, voluntarily or otherwise, and the spouse dies, or the children don't call or don't visit, that certainly can lead to depression and loss of contact with social activities. So clearly, it's something people should consider earlier in life, so that if they're really devoted to their job at the bank and their calculation of the interest rates, or what's going to happen when the new prime minister takes over in Uganda or something like that, one day they won't be doing that anymore. So they should consider, even when they're 40, 30, 40, 50, 60, well, what are they going to do when they're not involved in finance anymore? It's only so much time you can spend on tennis or golf or watching old movies. So I encourage people to pursue hobbies, and I guess hobbies is not really the right word, because there are activities that you wouldn't call hobbies, but just they should be involved in things that involve others. So certainly being part of a group is good. Could be a church or a mosque or whatever is good. Social interaction, social agencies, and international organizations, political activities, and whatever gets you out of the house and involved with others.
Thank you.
And I think it's an enormous problem that a university should be devoted to education of the community, not only education of the students. So the taking classes in the university, or there are many places have classes available for older persons to learn about whatever. There was a group in Manhattan run by the New School for adults, and they were teaching each other. So I was talking to my 90-year-old aunt many years ago, and my wife had a friend who was a professor of physics at Princeton, who just wrote a book about something important in physics. And my aunt said, "Oh, I heard him give a talk just last week at the New School." But so for her to get in the subway at 90 and hear her talk about physics was really a wonderful thing, involving social, cognitive, psychological, and physical activities. And of course, the most important book here is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which everybody should read regardless of their age.
I couldn't agree more. You've written about membranosis. What is it, and why is it important to understand how microbes influence brain aging?
Membranosis is a term for microbiome-associated proteopathy. So that means bacteria in the mouth, the throat, and the gut, and perhaps on the skin, can influence the folding of proteins. And we proposed this in 2015, and subsequently evidence from our group, as well as others in Copenhagen, Israel, and Los Angeles, have shown that bacterial products can influence proteins to lead to Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease, and perhaps motor neuron disease, also amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It's possible to help this process, or perhaps prevent it, through diet, which means a high fiber, low saturated fat, relatively low salt, relatively low sugar, and a diet high in diversity. So we were discussing earlier that I had worked in Arab populations in the Middle East. They have a higher risk of Alzheimer's disease, perhaps because a high-fat diet, they eat a lot of meat, and older persons are relatively physically inactive, and they smoke, and they have low levels of education. Traditionally, for older people. On the other hand, in India, because of poverty, there's high levels of physical activity, a low risk of obesity, and an incredibly diverse diet. So an American might eat steak this big and a potato, so that's two things. But in Indian diet, it could be dal and khichdi and paratha and roti and bindi, and on and on and on and on and on. One meal could have literally 20, 30 things.
Agreed.
Or my wife's favorite spice is panchpuram, which is 5 things, all in one. So that, and this doesn't mean you can't have salt or you can't have sugar, but we're not prepared by evolution to eat sugar on a constant basis. Because 10,000 years ago, no humans had constant exposure to sugar, unless you lived near a beehive, right? So that, but you wouldn't be eating the honey every day. And a Coke this size has, has a toxic amount of sugar. It's just unreal how much sugar is in there. And the microbes in our gut have no choice. They have to eat what we feed them. So we have an advantage that we can control what they eat. So if you are choosing what to eat in a restaurant, let's say, you should consider not only what you like to eat and what it means for your cardiac health in regard to fat content, but also what would your bacteria want if they had a vote? Well, they would not choose meat because meat has no fiber and has no nutritional value for your intestinal bacteria. And you can't live without them. So you want them to be happy.
You've talked about a diversity of diet, and I wanted to ask you about the Mediterranean diet and the Mayan diet, and your views on those as protective for the brain and also, of course, good for gut health.
This is called the green Mediterranean diet.
Mm-hmm.
So with more vegetables and wine is fine. We don't recommend that people drink if they don't drink now. But it's debatable, but perhaps one glass of wine a day is okay. Binge drinking is not good. I'm not familiar with the Mind diet.
It's kind of a variant of the Mediterranean diet, which I think has been part of several research studies. One of the things I wanted to ask you, I remember in one lecture, you put up this bottle of Chyawanprash and you talked about the diversity of ingredients. And so that I always found that fascinating. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Well, this product has, I forgot if it's 400 or 500 different herbs in it. And my father-in-law would take it every day. I met with the director of research at Dabur in Delhi, and I tried to convince him to support research into diversity and fiber products, in which he was happy to acknowledge that his products had influences on the gut bacteria, but he had no idea what they were, and he really didn't want to know. I think because he's perfectly happy to make money with the products he's selling already. But I would be careful about some of them without knowing. So I'm not knowledgeable about this, but I have read some Indian products like that can have toxic products inside. So I don't know.
I understand. But I guess it's as an example of diversity, it's interesting. But I completely understand that one cannot endorse what goes into every one of those products. And I'm sure there are authentic and non-authentic variants of the same.
And another example is dal, which is high in fiber, and sometimes it could have 5 different kinds of dal, in the 5 different kinds of lentils. Research on hunter-gatherer populations, which exist today in New Guinea or Africa, show that their diet as hunter-gatherers are much more diverse, is much more higher in fiber, and much more diverse than any diet for humans today. And that is what we were eating when our genes were selected.
Yeah,
over the past 100,000 years.
What's the current evidence supporting the role of gut health in reducing memory loss or cognitive decline?
There have been various studies showing that bacterial communities in the gut are linked to either Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. And there have been trials of fecal microbiota transplant for these diseases, particularly ALS. And I believe that the first trial was negative, but that there is evidence to say that the gut bacteria can be involved, and that all our ancestors going back 100,000 years, actually 1 billion years, they all had bacteria in the gut, that it's not possible to live on Earth without it. And we evolved the capacity to tolerate these bacteria, because if our immune system would recognize the fact that we have a lot of bacteria there in the gut and decided to attack them because they're invaders, they're foreigners, they're alien, we'd all have inflammatory bowel disease and we'd all be very sick, and that'd be the end of humanity. So as we evolve the capacity to tolerate them, to allow them to be there, they evolved the capacity to have us tolerate them, because if they didn't do that, we would attack them and everybody'd have inflammatory bowel disease and we'd all be dead. So that it's a really beautiful interaction. So it's said that the immune system gardens the bacteria. Oh, it chooses which ones it wants. And that it's a very important choice, but that has had a profound influence on human survival and evolution so it's reasonable to consider that when you make dietary choices.
So it would be wise to conclude by saying that the diversity is a very key ingredient of maintaining all reserves, physical, cognitive, social, and psychological. And also that the gut microbiome is a really important component of our cognitive health, and it's diversity that's going to help us protect and preserve our gut microbiomes. Would that be reasonable?
Yes, certainly. To always consider things in the context of human evolution, that we evolve certain capacities and tendencies and vulnerabilities depending on what our ancestors went through, what was adaptive and what was not adaptive. And that we don't need to copy the lifestyle of our ancestors, but at least to consider why we do things and what can be done best to allow us to live longer. And perhaps the most pervasive or important or profound message, I hope, is that aging is not inevitable. Therefore, since it doesn't happen to everyone, it's an opportunity. So it's not really reasonable, let's say, for a 94-year-old who goes in a nursing home to say, why me? Why should this horrible thing happen to me? Well, more than 95% of people when she was born, have already died. So the fact that she's still able to complain is like kind of wonderful. So, and that it's important to view your current situation in respect, in comparison, or in relation to the miracle and the blessing that you're still alive and that you have this opportunity. The opportunity is how you live will depend how well you age. And it's an opportunity that's not given to everyone. So if I feel particularly bad one day that, well, I can't play tennis as well as I used to, and I can't, maybe I'm not going to go skiing again. In relationship to my friend Andrew, who is my age, who was also a scientist, and well, he died of heart disease, and he's not able to complain about getting older. He's not here to complain.
Staying positive and appreciating the opportunities that life allows is
exactly
as important. Thank you, Rob. A most enlightening conversation. Really loved the whole idea of unaging and the 4 factors that impact on how we age. And I'm sure that those who come across this webinar are going to learn a lot from it and really enjoy it too. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.